There we are. Okay. Well, like the spider said to the fly, welcome to my place. My name is Alan Henry, and what you see here is what I call my golf lab. More specifically, the Planetracker golf lab. I like the word lab because I'm scientifically trained. I'm a physics teacher by training, and as a golf coach, I'd like to introduce a more scientific feel to my work. The first principle is a redefinition of the expression swing plane. I've got here a two-lever pendulum. It's a two-lever pendulum there. It's got an inner lever, an outer lever. Between the two you've got a hinge, and at the top here you've got a pivot point for the two-lever pendulum. Now, a two-lever pendulum, the characteristic of a two-lever pendulum is that it produces this flicking action, which is a violent transfer of energy from the primary lever to the secondary lever, and we call that a release. The secondary lever, the outer lever, releases around the inner lever. I can, if I have a plane for them to move on, it's actually quite easy to make that, to cause that effect. So you can do it very smoothly, and better still, if I fix, it becomes even more efficient if I fix the center of the whole thing there, and I attach it by attaching it to an axis, and then I turn the axis, and that gives you that effect. Here to here is the only time in the swing where you have all those elements: an inner lever, an outer lever, a fixed swing center, a hinge, a flat plane, and a release. Now, I have in my hand a 6-iron. I know from my own measurements that the angle that the release plane makes with the horizontal for my 6-iron is 55 degrees. Now, that means that I can put a permanent black line across the camera at 55 degrees because it's a 6-iron, and I can call that my release plane. Now, once you have such a line as a permanent line, as a permanent reference line that you can check on the screen in front of you, well, the world's your oyster, because there are certain camera angles which are much more useful for studying the swing than others. There's that one there, of course, which you call the down the line view. I've already demonstrated that one. But you could have a camera over here looking back, again against that same line, or you could have a camera behind the golfer up here looking down the line of the swing, okay, looking down that way. In other words, from behind there, that gives a different view. And you can have a camera up here at right angles to this release plane line. And those 4 camera angles will give you much more precise information on what your swing is actually doing during the release phase. You have to analyze your swing in relation to the release plane. No other analysis makes sense. The release plane has to be established before you film. And that brings us very neatly into principle number 2 of the Planetracker hypothesis, and in fact the very reason why this whole facility has been set up. And that principle number 2 is that if you're going to do video analysis, you must remove parallax, the parallax error that's inherent in any 2D video shot, because you're filming a 3D movement with something that produces a 2D image. And the only way that the 2D image will tell you the truth is if you've removed any parallax problem. Well, we do that by using our own patented design called a Planetracker. Using this device here, I can adjust the camera to track the angle of the release plane. Like I say, the camera goes along with that angle. It just follows it. In this particular case, I can set it at 55 degrees for my 6 iron. I can get even greater range of movement for the camera because I can move it up and down this way. So I can place the camera anywhere I want, but always respecting parallax in relation to the golfer. Down the line, back from the target, behind the golfer, and in front of the golfer. Those are the 4 key camera angles that you need to analyze the swing. And for 60 years, and folks, it is 60 years, for 60 years, the parallax problem has spoilt video analysis of the swing. So at Planetracker Golf, this is a fundamental part of what we do in swing analysis. We remove the parallax error, which has been plaguing golf swing analysis for 60 years. Your body is an amazing creation. It's designed to do all sorts of things, and it acts like a machine. It can act just like a machine, like an engine. It's designed to do that. When it's called on to rotate your hand around your body, what happens is that your body creates an axis, and as the hand, if it's done really well, as the hand rotates around the body, the hand describes a plane, a flat plane, which is exactly at 90 degrees to that axis. Right, well, that can be seen in a baseball batter going. It can be seen in a cricket bowler as he brings his hand over here. And he does that. It can even be seen in a world-class stone skipper. They have competitions, you know, and these guys, you should watch their form as they throw the stone. And folks, you better believe that it happens in a really good golf swing. Now here is a really good golf swing. This is Tony Finau, you all recognize him. I've studied his swing at length, so I'm able to put a line across his body to indicate his release plane. And here it is. I want you to watch carefully what happens. So he's taken his club up, takes his back there, now he's just gone through a transition, and then his hands come down and hit that black line. So his hands form that release plane there. At that point, the club and the hands are on the release plane. The club is simply following the hands. Watch how the club head just goes straight down that black line, through the ball, up to the other side, and you never see it till it comes out round about here. So it's gone through the ball on plane. And he has rotated around that red line, which is his rotational axis. Now you can be sure I'm telling you the truth, because the camera, in this case, is looking through there, and the field of view of the camera coincides with the release plane. Therefore, what you've seen is the truth about Tony Finau's swing. Here's another beautiful, beautiful swing. I absolutely love it. Fred Couples. This guy is 60 years old, but he still has one of the most beautiful swings in the world. I've taken care of parallax. I've selected a video clip where the camera angle is such. The camera's looking down there. It's aligned with his release plane. This guy's got a fairly high release plane, but the principle is the same. We're watching to see what happens on the way down. There he is at the top, transition, there, transition. Now, his hands come down onto the release plane, and from then on the club just goes straight down there. But I want you to notice how his body rotates around this line, which is defined by, that's his bottom, the bottom vertebra of his thorax is there, the midpoint of his shoulders is there, and he rotates around that line. Watch carefully. The club is still basically on plane way through the swing. Absolutely beautiful swing. This is Steve Alker, our very own Steve Alker, best senior golfer on the planet right now. There he goes, takes it up, Philly. Transition. There he is, he's gone onto the plane, his hands have hit the plane. Look at the way he turns around his rotation axis and see how the club just goes straight down that black line. And he's still on his rotation axis. I could demonstrate this golfer after golfer. Every elite golfer does it. As long, and you can see it as long as the camera's in the right place. In this case, Tiger Woods hitting something like an 8-iron. The camera is there, aligned with his release plane, and just watch the way he organizes his torso, his upper body, to rotate around the red line as the club, from the moment the club starts to go straight down the black line. Here we go. He takes the club up nicely. There he is at the top. Transition, stop. There. He's hit the line. His rotation axis is established, and he just rotates around it. And then he comes off it. They all do it. There's no exceptions. Traditionally, the axis for the swing has been taken to be the spine, the golfer's spine, but the spine is actually a curved line. It's a double curved line, like an S shape, and it goes through quite a bit of contortion as during the downswing in particular. So by definition, an axis is a straight line. An engineer will tell you that all day. So we're looking for a straight line, and this line, if you just put a line like that to generally represent the spine, well, that's not quite good enough. The real rotational axis for the golfer is the line that goes through the torso. It goes from the bottom thoracic vertebra through the torso to this point here, which is the midpoint between the shoulders. In other words, this red line here, and you can tell as this golfer releases that that's the axis around which the body really turns during the release. Okay. And the golf swing is really dependent, a good golf swing is really dependent on the stability of that red line for the golfer. It's called keeping your form through the shot. Very difficult thing to do, and it's something that most people really struggle with. So there you have it. Principle number 3, and it's an important one, of the Planetracker hypothesis is what I've just explained. There is what I call a true rotational axis, and it applies not just to the golf swing, it applies, as I've mentioned, to any time that you rotate your hand violently around your body, actively, consciously, skipping a stone, bowling a ball, swinging a baseball bat. You have to rotate your hands around your body, swinging a golf club. Now, let's try and summarize what we've been talking about in this video. I'm proposing a model for the golf swing, a new model, which I'm calling the Planetracker Hypothesis. Fundamentally, a good golf swing is based around a machine that your body creates, which we call a 2-lever system. Now the first element is a powered axis. So an axis is straight lines, powered axis, something like a motor to power the axis in the body. The power comes from the rotation of the shoulders. More about that later on. The second element is a primary lever which gets attached to the axis and can rotate around the axis as the axis is powered. Now, as the primary lever, the inner lever that I call it, it rotates around the axis, it creates a plane at right angles to the axis. The third element is an outer lever, which is attached to the inner lever and rotates around the inner lever by way of a hinge between the two. So we say that the outer lever releases around the inner lever, and if it's done properly, it releases on the plane that the inner lever has created. It's pretty hard to control, but that's where skill comes in. Number 4 is the hinge, as I've mentioned before, and this effect, this violent transfer of energy from the inner lever to the outer lever, which we call a release. And it's that effect that the golfer uses to achieve the high speed of a club head. And I've explained in the video that if you do have a plane, it's at the right time. It's a matter of timing, of course, but during the release phase, you get the turning of the shoulder creates that effect. Now, one of the fundamental claims of the hypothesis is that these 6 elements of the 2-lever pendulum are only present in the golf swing during the release phase, which is from hip in the downswing to hip in the through swing. Another fundamental premise in the hypothesis is that there is only one part of the swing where the club travels on a flat plane, and that is the release plane that we've just been talking about, which is created by the rotating hands. There is no other flat plane. There is no shoulder plane. There is no elbow plane. There is no shaft plane. Those are just constructs which have been suggested by putting lines across screens, but they don't exist in reality. At Planetracker, we also contend that if you're going to analyze the swing, you must analyze it in relation to this only plane, which is the release plane. And to do that, you must make sure that you remove parallax from any video analysis by putting cameras in correct positions. And of course, that's a science in itself. The axis has to be stable if the plane is going to be stable. It's the axis that has to be stable. The plane is at right angles to the axis and stays that way. So if you move the axis around, the plane just moves with it. And of course, all this has implications. If you have a stable axis, you have a stable plane. If you have a stable release plane, you have a stable release. And if you have a stable release, you have a stable impact. And that's, of course, the holy grail of the golf swing. And all of golf coaching should really be aimed at establishing a stable rotational axis which the release plane will form around, and during the release, keeping that axis as stable as possible. Now, if you press me, really press me, for as short as possible a definition of the Planetracker hypothesis, I would say something like this. I would express it this way: stabilization of the rotational axis during the release is the fundamental requirement of a good golf swing. And every element of coaching, every strategy should be aimed at establishing a stable rotational axis during the release. Everything else is secondary. Ultimately, swing analysis is going to boil down to the interpretation of, images such as this one, where we've gone to 3D motion capture and created an avatar of a golfer's swing with the rotational axis in the right place, the true rotational axis, remember, not the spine line, but the true rotational axis, and following that rotational axis during the swing, looking for stability at the right time. This is down the line. Watch the rotational axis. Here is another view from the top, looking down the axis. And here's a view from the target, looking back at the golfer as he's swinging towards the target. It's an exciting project because through the project we can turn the attention onto that line. The release plane will be at right angles to that line. If that line is not stable, the release plane will wobble and you'll get an unpredictable impact. That's the whole idea. The whole idea is to develop strategies that will stabilize that line. So I'm quite excited. Thank you very much for listening this far, and I trust that you'll stick with us through thick and thin as we develop these ideas a little bit further. Happy golfing.